Have you noticed how we say comfortable even though the word is spelled comfortable? Have you ever heard anyone say ax when talking about questions? Or have you wondered why people often call the second month of the year February, even though there's technically an R in the middle? In this video, we're going to talk about fast speech and the interesting things native English speakers do in order to speak the language more quickly and efficiently. We'll look at dropping sounds, switching them around, or even transforming them into entirely different sounds. We often make these changes because they're easier for our mouths, or better yet, the entire vocal apparatus to produce. In other words, they're shortcuts. As a result, we're able to flow between sounds more effortlessly, which helps us speak more quickly. The interesting thing to note about these sound changes is that they're not universal or required. That means that some speakers make them and others don't. These changes can happen all of the time, sometimes, or not at all. For this reason, this isn't exactly a how-to video, but more of a how interesting video. You're more than welcome to try the changes out to see how they feel, but please remember what I always say. Speaking clearly is more important than speaking quickly. As always, I encourage you to get curious about how you hear the English language actually spoken. Use what you've learned to help you understand what people are saying. The first way we may change words is by switching sounds or syllables around. The technical term for this process is metathesis. The thing is, we don't switch the sounds around just because we feel like it. We change sounds because the order feels more comfortable for our vocal apparatus. This can happen because certain sounds regularly appear next to each other in other words. You may hear some people say ax instead of ask. This is actually one of the most common transpositions of sounds, dating back over 1,000 years. We don't have too many words that have that sk or sk cluster at the end, but we're very comfortable saying words that end in x, such as verbs like picks and walks, and nouns like blocks and socks. That's another reason why it may simply be more efficient to say ax instead of ask. Similarly, some people may pronounce the word asterisk for this symbol right here as asterisk. Moving on, English speakers often switch the R sound in words like comfortable, prescription, and introduce. In fact, comfortable with the R sound after the T sound is actually considered a standard pronunciation of the word in American English. You may hear people say prescription instead of prescription, putting the schwa sound before the R sound. You may also hear people say introduce as introduce. These subtle changes help the words flow more easily out of their mouths. Here are a few more examples. Some American dialects pronounce pretty as purty and hundred as hundred. You may hear people pronounce temperature as temperature, 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 or temperature. A couple of other examples are pronouncing the word cavalry, a military word, as calvary, a religious word. You may also hear people pronounce the word foliage as foliage, shifting that E sound before the L sound. Another way that we may change words to make them easier and faster to say is by deleting sounds. We may delete sounds that happen within a word or between words. There are quite a few processes for deleting sounds, but the general category is called elision. Once again, we drop these sounds because they feel awkward or inefficient to say. Deleting the sounds helps keep our speech flowing. Let's look at elision between words first. Have you ever had an ice cream on a warm, sunny day? When pronouncing this delicious treat, we drop the t sound from the word iced. Iced cream sounds like ice cream. In fact, no one writes iced cream with the ed ending anymore. These days, the frozen treat is simply known as ice cream. When we say next day, we often drop the T at the end of the first word, next day. You'll hear this all the time in the phrase next day shipping, or when someone is talking about a series of events. Similarly, we often drop the T at the end of last when it's followed by another word. For example, last time, last place, last month, last year. You can hear something similar when we talk about fast speech. We drop the T from fast and it sounds like fast speech. That pesky little T just slows us down. If you hear someone talking about certain valuable items, such as a gold medal or a diamond ring, you may hear them drop the D sound from the end of the first word. Gold medal, diamond ring. The D sound requires a little too much time and effort, so it often gets deleted. Or if you hear someone suggest that you come around or in a negative situation to go away, you may hear that they drop the schwa sound at the beginning of the second word. The phrases might sound like come round or go away. If you've been around here for a while, then you know how stress works. We put more effort into pronouncing stress syllables and we relax on the rest. Sometimes we relax so much on unstressed or reduced syllables that they disappear entirely. When we drop a reduced vowel or consonant sound from the middle of a word, it's called syncope. Consider these super common words. Family is often pronounced family, family. Memory drops that schwa sound in the middle and sounds like memory, memory. Camera does the same thing and ends up being pronounced camera, camera. When talking about this delicious cocoa treat, we usually drop the schwa sound in the middle, so it sounds like chocolate, chocolate. Moving on to another food example, we have vegetable, which usually drops that second vowel sound and is pronounced vegetable, vegetable. Another bull word that loses that schwa sound is the word preferable, which is often pronounced preferable, preferable. Another reason we may delete sounds or syllables when speaking is because a similar combination of sounds appears twice in the same word. When these sounds happen close to one another, they're tricky for us to articulate. So once again, it's easier and more efficient for us to say the sounds just one time. This is called haplology. You've definitely heard this when talking about months of the year, since February is usually pronounced without that first R sound. February, February. You've probably also noticed that library is commonly pronounced library, with just one R sound. Library, library. Many adverbs that end in ly end up dropping a syllable. Probably may be pronounced probably, probably, or sometimes even probably or pre. Regularly is a tricky one, so people may say regularly, regularly. Truth be told, I struggle with that word all the time when recording videos. Particularly might drop that second R sound as well and sound like particularly, particularly. Similarly might sound like simile, simile from time to time. Let's look at another common change that happens in words that have the nt cluster within them. In various North American dialects, the nt sounds end up being pronounced as a nasalized flap. Since this flap happens inside our mouths, like the flap T that is so common in American English, the t sound is very subtle. In other words, it sounds like the t sound has disappeared. It's very possible that some people don't say it at all. I'll leave that for the linguists to study and analyze, but for now, let's take a closer look at the words that are often pronounced this way. Let's look at the word center. This is a super common word, which means our mouths have found a way to say it more efficiently. You'll often hear us say it as center, center, with a soft flap T that almost seems to disappear. Words that start with inter often end up sounding like they start with inner. For example, let's take the word internet. Since we're always using this word, we end up saying it more efficiently as internet, internet. International may be pronounced as international, international. Interview often turns into interview, interview. When we're talking about driving, we may mention an intersection or interstate. It's very common to say these two words as intersection, intersection, or interstate, interstate. Interactive may become interactive, interactive. This word has several different pronunciations, including interesting, interesting, and interesting with that flap T. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Besides these interwords, we also have enterwords such as entertainment, entertaining, and entertainer. You may hear that first t sound disappear, so the words sound like entertainment, entertaining, entertainer. Here are a few more common words and phrases where the flap T sound seems to disappear. The fruit cantaloupe may be pronounced cantaloupe, cantaloupe. The season winter may be pronounced winter, winter, so it sounds kind of like someone who has won. You may hear people say painting as painting instead. Painting. When we're talking about the Christmas elf Santa Claus, it's common to say Santa Claus, Santa Claus. One of Canada's most well-known cities, Toronto, is called Toronto by locals, Toronto. Actually, I think they often drop that first schwa sound as well, so it sounds like Toronto, Toronto. This common sound change is one reason why we end up with reductions or informal contractions like wanna and gonna. Want to is more efficient to say as wanna, wanna. Going to is faster to say as gonna, gonna. Another similar change happens in words that have two R's in them. You know as well as I do that R sound can be tricky, so when it appears twice in one word, it's especially challenging. To make the word easier to say, people may actually drop the first R, which often appears after a schwa sound in an unstressed syllable. This is called dissimilation. Dissimilation is when two similar sounds actually lose what they have in common and become less similar. In these examples, the words lose the first R sound. For example, surprise becomes surprise, surprise, because it's easier to say. Particular ends up sounding like particular, particular. Caterpillar ends up turning into caterpillar, caterpillar. Governor becomes governor, governor. Reservoir drops that middle R and becomes reservoir, reservoir. Adversary turns into adversary, adversary. From time to time, you may hear people drop the R sound before the schwa sound instead. Some people say frustrated as frustrated, or library as library. For more examples of dropped sounds, check out the videos on deleted syllables and contractions I've linked below. Now that you better understand why sounds seem to disappear from words, let's talk about why sounds may change into a completely different one. In order to say words more quickly, we may change where we actually form the sound. After all, similar sounds are articulated or produced in the same general location, so it's less work to say them back to back. This process is called assimilation, and it's super common in words and phrases. For example, the word input is often pronounced input. The n sound changes into the sound so that it flows more easily into the p sound. Input, input. It makes sense when you consider where the and p sounds are formed. Similarly, in the sentence, I live in Boston, the n sound that appears before the city name changes into the sound to flow more easily into the b sound that follows. I live in Boston. I live in Boston. I can believe it has the same change, where the n sound changes into the sound. I can believe it. I can believe it. When saying I'm on my way, we often change the n sound into the sound to flow more easily into the next word. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. It's easier and more efficient to slightly shift where the sound is articulated to keep our speech flowing. With a phrase like we can go, We may slightly adjust the n sound into the ng sound instead. We can go. We can go. The ng sound is closer to the g sound that follows. If we say we should go instead, we'll change the d sound into the g sound so that it keeps flowing into the verb that follows. We should go. We should go. With the sentence that could be fun, the d sound of could may change into the b sound instead. That could be fun. That could be fun. The sound moves from inside the mouth to the lips. That place is cool becomes that place is cool. Rather than tap the t sound inside the mouth, we move the sound to the lips instead. That place is cool. That place is cool. Once again, these changes help us say these words more efficiently because we're forming the sounds in the same place of articulation. Keep in mind that people may or may not transform these sounds. It depends on a lot of factors, such as how quickly they're speaking, how relaxed they feel, and the people they're talking to. Once again, these are possible substitutions, not required ones. If you've ever heard someone say Wouldja, Didja, or Whatcha, then you've heard them do something called palatalization. Palatalization is a form of assimilation where the sound moves towards the palatal region. The palate is the roof of the mouth. Let's look at the examples of fast speech you're probably most familiar with. When a modal verb like could, would, or should, or an auxiliary verb like did is followed by the word you, the d sound at the end of the verb changes into the j sound to flow more smoothly into the y sound that follows. For example, could you becomes could you. Would you becomes would you. Should you becomes should you. And did you becomes did you. Some people take it a step further and reduce the oo sound to the schwa sound. Coulda, wouldja, shoulda, didja. Similarly, in phrases like what are you, got you, or bet you, the t sound changes into the ch sound to flow more easily into the y sound at the beginning of the word you. The sounds end up blending together so that what are you sounds like what you or whatcha. Got you sounds like got you or gotcha. Bet you sounds like bet you or betcha. This process is called yod coalescence and occurs in the natural pronunciation of many other words, including nature and soldier. Here's another change that you hear a lot in American English. Let's talk about how we pronounce certain words that have the sounds tun in the final syllable of the word. You just heard me use a glottal stop in the word certain. A glottal stop is a sound that's produced by blocking the airflow in the vocal tract, specifically in the glottis. It's the sound you can hear when we say, uh-oh. Even though glottal stops are common in many languages, they can be confusing in English because sometimes we use them and sometimes we don't. Let's look at the glottalization of the t sound when it appears before an unstressed un sound. When saying words like important, mountain, and certain, we often change the t sound to a glottal stop. Important, mountain, certain. Once again, this happens because it's quicker and more efficient for our vocal apparatus. If you pronounce the t sound before the n, you have to tap your tongue against the ridge of your mouth 2 times in a row. By using a glottal stop instead, the sound becomes a little easier to pronounce. Let's take a closer look at these words that are often pronounced with a glottal stop. Instead of saying important, we often say important. Important. Rather than pronouncing these words as mountain and fountain, we often say mountain and fountain instead. Mountain, fountain. You certainly noticed how I said certain earlier. Certain and certainly are a little more work for the mouth than certain, certain, and certainly, certainly. When it comes to words with a double T like cotton, button, and mitten, we often substitute a glottal stop instead, so they sound like cotton, button, mitten. Now that we've looked at how sounds change, let's talk about adding sounds to words or phrases, which is often called insertion. Sometimes adding a sound makes the transitions between sounds easier. First, let's look at epenthesis. This is when we insert a vowel or a consonant into a word to make it easier to pronounce. For example, this cute little critter is a hamster. Many people insert the p sound into the word so that it actually sounds like hamster. The insertion of the p sound also happens in the word warmth. Many people add a p sound before the final th in order to make it easier to say. Warmth, warmth. You may also hear this on the word something, where people will add a p before thing. Something, something. The last name Thompson is often pronounced Thompson for the same reason. These changes may actually end up in the spelling of the word. For example, the word empty now includes the p sound in the middle of the word. Empty. Back in the day, the word thunder used to be pronounced and spelled without that middle D. The word incidence is often pronounced with a t sound between the final n and s. It ends up sounding like the plural of the word incidents. We also add vowel sounds to words in order to make them easier to say. Some people pronounce picnic as picnic instead. Same goes for the job realtor. You can hear people say realtor. The word athlete often gets an extra in the middle and sounds like athlete. Athletes may choose to complete a triathlon, which is often pronounced as triathlon, with an extra in the middle. My curiosity about these added sounds started when somebody pointed out that I pronounced familiar as familiar in one of my videos. As it turns out, this is called R insertion. This happens in words that already contain an R sound, such as the word familiar. It may be easier for us to say fur at the beginning of familiar because of words like forget and forgive. You can also hear this insertion of R in the word persevere, which is often pronounced as persevere, persevere. The frozen treat sherbet often gets an extra R at the end as well. Sherbet. Besides adding sounds to make words easier to pronounce, we also add sounds in order to link words together to say them more efficiently. For example, when linking between vowel sounds, the w or y sound might be added to make the transition a little easier. This is called intrusion. Because long vowels and diphthongs are off glides, they have a little extra sound at the end. Since we're already forming the sound with our mouth, we simply keep going and add it to the next word. For example, do it becomes do it, do it. We use the w shape to link the two words. Grow up turns into grow up, grow up. Once again, we're linking with that w sound. Throw out becomes throw out, throw out, with the w sound in between the words. We ate becomes we ate, we ate. In this case, we're linking with the y sound. I am becomes I am, I am. We use the y shape to link to the next word. They asked becomes they asked, they asked. The y sound links the two words. This can also happen in the middle of words like idea and create. We simply use that extra sound to connect the syllables. Idea, idea, create, create. Adding this extra sound to link between vowels can also be called liaison, and it's one of the features of connected speech. Let's discuss linking sounds. Another way we link words together is catenation. Catenation is when we join a consonant sound at the end of one word to the vowel sound at the beginning of the next word. For example, the phrasal verb pick up almost sounds like pick up because the k sound connects the two words. Pick up, pick up. In the phrasal verb call out, you can hear that the l sound at the end of the first word connects to the vowel sound at the beginning of the next word. call out, call out. With the phrase an answer, you can hear that the n sound at the end of the article joins with the vowel sound at the beginning of the noun. An answer, an answer. In a sentence, it will sound like this. Please call out an answer. In the common greeting, what's up, you can hear that the s sound connects to the word that follows. What's up? What's up? This is why people often reduce the greeting to sup in casual speech. What happens if a sound appears twice in a row? Once at the end of one word and once at the beginning of the next word. In this case, we can use this sound to link the two words together. This is called gemination, and as usual, it helps us move through words more quickly. Rather than pronouncing the same sound back to back, we simply extend the sound and flow into the next word. Let's look at a few examples. Big garden. They have a big garden. We extend the g sound and flow into the next word. They have a big garden. Signed document. Please return the signed document. In this case, we use the d sound to flow on to the next word. Please return the signed document. Nice street. They live on a nice street. We use the s sound to flow between words. They live on a nice street. Hall light. Turn on the hall light. The l sound helps us transition smoothly between words. Turn on the hall light. Black cat. Did you see the black cat? We're using the k sound to link between the words. Did you see the black cat? Of course, there are other ways that we link words together, but these are the ones that you've probably noticed the most. Now that we've discussed fast speech and the interesting things native English speakers do to speak more quickly and efficiently, start noticing when you hear these changes. Tune in to these subtle differences in how words sound when we add, drop, switch, change, or link sounds. Native speakers might not even realize that these changes are happening when they're listening to other people, unless the change is noticeably different than their own dialect. With that said, while some of these pronunciations are widely accepted or not even noticed, others are often judged or criticized. There are language purists or prescriptivists who believe that there are rules that need to be followed. As you know from your own experience, these issues related to language, identity, and belonging are nuanced and complex. At this point, you're probably wondering if you need to do these things when you're speaking English. I think it's important to be aware of these changes so that you understand what people are saying, even if the words are pronounced slightly differently than you expect. However, by now you know my emphasis is on speaking clearly and confidently so that people understand and listen to what you have to say. Once you've got stress and intonation under control, you can experiment and see if these changes help you flow between words or speak more efficiently. If it seems hard to make these changes, they may be distracting you from your meaning and your message. Think of fast speech as one possible tool in your toolbox. You don't have to use it all the time, just when it helps you achieve your goals. For even more on fast speech and clear speech, check out these videos. I'm Kim from EnglishWithKim.com. Have a good one. Goodbye.